Hello. Welcome to this 20th session of basic course in biomedical research being conducted by the Department of Research in Ambedkar Institute of Medical Sciences. And myself, Dr. Japleen Kaur, I'm an assistant professor in Obstetrics and Gynaecology. So today we'll be talking about conducting clinical trials. So why to conduct a clinical trial? We basically test a new diagnostic or treatment modality. Then there are certain phases of a clinical trial like 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1 is small amount of healthy volunteers. 2 is a small number of target population. 3 again is larger number of volunteers from the target population. And 4 is the post-marketing phase or the pharmacovigilance phase. And by now you have learned about how to design the protocol, like taking into consideration the population, the intervention, the comparator, the outcomes, the timelines, etc. So in this particular lecture, we'll be talking about the regulatory authorities' reviews required for conducting a clinical trial, like funding, addressing the ethical concerns. We'll also talk about the recruitment, randomization, what's a placebo, and the safety of the trial participants. Then a little about data analysis, results, conclusions, and how they give rise to directions for future research. Then importance of data archival. Finally, we'll summarize the critical issues in any trial implementation. So what are the scientific, ethical, and regulatory reviews of clinical trial? So whether the research question is sound or not is seen under scientific review by the Institutional Scientific Advisory Committees or the ICMR. Whether safety and welfare of the participants is adequately protected comes under ethical review, which is conducted by the Institute Ethics Committee or any central or national committee in case you don't have in the institute. Then whether the research methods are appropriate, the funding, etc., are properly done, comes under the regulatory reviews via Health Ministry screening committees, the Drug Controller General of India, Genetic Engineering Approval Committee in case applicable. So coming to a few questions. So this will be a question and answer thing so that you don't get bored. So the Scientific Advisory Committee examines the safety and welfare of the research participants in a trial. Well, it's false, because we saw that scientific sees whether the research question and methodology is appropriate, whereas the safety and welfare is done by the ethics committee. So another question related to the reviews: if the project is getting funded internationally, which of the following committees looks at the regulatory affairs? So it has to be the Health Ministry Screening Committee, because it's an international funding is involved. So they will look into it. Whereas if there are genetically modified or engineering products being used, then the Genetic Engineering Approval Committee comes into picture. So again, revising, what was the role of the Ethics Committee? It was safety and welfare of the participants. So in order for a clinical trial to be ethically appropriate, the participants must give their informed voluntary consent. Yes, definitely. That ensures their safety as well as voluntary nature of the participation. So what are the ethical issues and how we address them when we are conducting a trial? We have an independent ethical review of the whole protocol. We should ensure community engagement and support. Suppose you are conducting the trial in a remote tribal area. If you involve the leaders or influential people, then it'll be easier to engage the support of all the participants. And then whatever consent you take should be properly informed, and it must be very, very voluntary. You must have a proper patient information sheet which details the procedures, answers a lot of frequently asked questions for the participants. Then must ensure the protection and safety of subjects throughout the trial. And even after post-trial, you must have systems in place to offer them support and any follow-up care if required, and must follow the best quality procedures and the standard of care. Use of placebos only where we don't have a standard of care treatment. Otherwise, they should not be used. We'll see later. And tell the participants that all their data is confidential and only anonymized data is shared for the purpose of further analysis with other investigators. Now, informed consent is not just a one-stop thing. It's not just you gave a paper and they signed. It's a whole procedure, and it is informed and voluntary. How do you ensure that you've done that? You may say, I informed everything, but where's the proof, right? So you can have audio-visual recording of the whole procedure in case the participant listens to a few things, wants more time to understand. You can have it in multiple sittings. And you should give the patient information sheet in advance for them to have read the whole thing. So your documents in the trial, in your trial registry, it must show that the date and time when the information sheet was shared compared to the date and time when the participant actually decided to participate. Give them opportunity for questions, always, and also check their understanding by asking questions from your side, whether they have understood what they have been told. And the consents are signed always in duplicate copies. So one is kept with the subject and one is for the investigator. Again, a very important aspect of conducting a clinical trial is safety. So any adverse event has to be noted. What is an adverse event? It is any unfavorable or unintended sign which is temporally associated with the use of your medicinal product. Whether or not it is related, it doesn't matter. You have to record anything and everything that happens during the time of your trial follow-up. So even if there's a dog bite, even if there's a road traffic accident, which you think is not related to your drug, you still have to note it. Again, they are classified as solicited or unsolicited. Solicited means expected. So like we can expect after any injection, there can be some redness, there can be some pain, there can be some swelling. So they are sort of expected. But after an injection, suppose the patient is developing cold, which you don't think is expected from your particular drug. So it is called as unsolicited, unexpected, but it should still be noted as an unsolicited adverse event. Again, it can be related or it can be unrelated. So that you have to see. Suppose a patient can have a headache after a vaccine injection, but in case the subject has a history of migraine and he took something which aggravated the migraine, it is a solicited event, but you can classify it as unrelated if the investigator feels so. Now, what's the difference between an adverse drug reaction and an adverse event? An adverse drug reaction is an adverse event which is been proved to be related to the drug, whereas an adverse event is anything adverse happening which is just related temporally. That is in the timelines. It is related to the use of the product. It may be related, it may not be unrelated. And again, what's a serious adverse event? It can be death, or a very serious complication on a previous clinical condition, or hospitalization due to any cause. Just remember, it is any cause. Even a road traffic accident, which was due to negligent driving, which happened, a week or 10 days after you gave your medicinal product, has to be recorded. And every trial has trial stoppage rules defined in the very beginning. Mostly it is any 3 serious adverse events which are reviewed by the Data Safety Monitoring Board, which is again an independent entity which is looking at the safety aspect of your trial. So it can decide whether the study needs to be stopped or paused or stopped altogether. So we come to DSMB, which is a very important part of a clinical trial. So it is primarily responsible for which of the following? Periodically review and evaluate the accumulated study data for participant safety, periodically review and evaluate the study conduct and progress, make recommendations concerning the continuation, modification, or termination of a clinical trial. I think by now we are clear that it has all of the above roles. Which of the following? And see, an RCT, a randomized controlled trial, is the most common design that is used for conducting a clinical trial. So we come to that. And which of these is not an advantage of an RCT? It controls for confounding bias effectively, provides high level of evidence, can be conducted in the community or hospital. Blinding in the trial eliminates selection bias. So it may look very confusing, but once we look at the advantages and disadvantages, we'll understand that blinding in the trial eliminates the observer bias and not the selection bias. So then what takes care of the selection bias? Randomization. It's the randomization, because you have to allot the participants based on some random number sequence that you have generated by various methods. And the investigator cannot choose, I want to put this particular subject in the group 2. I can't do that. So I don't have the opportunity to create a selection bias. Again, it controls for confounding bias without adjustments. So some of the confounders which can affect your trial results are expected to be automatically adjusted between the 2-3 groups when you are randomly allocating them. It facilitates effective blinding, yes. So when you're randomly allocating to 2 similar looking drug preparations that you have made, and the investigator does not know which subject got which group, so they will be blinded to the allocation, and they can be more independent in the review of the side effects or the efficacy. So they will not sort of be influenced by wanting to put their trial product for better results, better efficacy, or lesser side effects. Okay. And it maintains all the advantages of cohort studies. So you can have long time follow-ups for those you have enrolled. You can see multiple outcomes also, and you can calculate the incidences also. But again, there are certain disadvantages like complexity and expense. That is why funding takes a big role here, and it has to be reviewed which company is funding so that it's ensured that there are no conflicts of interest there. It can lack representativeness since the volunteers can be sometimes different from the population of interest, and ethical issues like we discussed, the maintaining informed voluntariness of the consent and the safety of the participants, ensuring their welfare without any undue influence on them, can have a lot of issues. So finally, we arrive at the correct answer that blinding takes care of the observer bias. The blinding means the investigator who's looking at the outcomes is not aware of which subject got which group. So coming to the placebo. It is unethical to use a placebo for the control arm instead of the current standard of care in a clinical trial. What do you think? Yes, that's true. If there is a defined standard of care, then it's always better not to use a placebo. Although we know that placebo-controlled trial is a gold standard to prove that the new treatment is effective above and beyond its psychological results. As placebo is a pharmaceutically inert substance. So you know that whatever results you get are due to your particular drug. But if already a standard of care is established, you cannot keep the patient away from that. It's unethical to not give them treatment when there is a treatment available, even though you feel your treatment might be better. So in these cases, you should be conducting the active control trials or non-inferiority trials. So coming to our summary of critical issues in trial implementation, we must follow the informed consent procedure. The screening and enrollment should be strictly adhering to the inclusion and exclusion criteria. We must follow good clinical and laboratory factors so that quality is ensured and our results can be validated. We must adhere to our interventions and proper follow-up as defined. If we are doing multicentric trials, we must have standard operating procedures so that the study protocols are standard everywhere. Then it's always good to have an independent monitoring research organization, which is sending monitors to you, looking at your processes, your paperwork, ensuring that informed consent procedure has been followed properly, all the safety information is being given properly, right? So the safety assessment has to be ensured every adverse event, whether serious or not, related or not, must be reported, and its management also should be shared and documented in your records. And reimbursements, compensation, and grievance redressal must be an important part of your trial conducting. So the reimbursements should not seem like they're incentives. They should only be for reimbursing their travel expenditures or loss of wages from missing day at work when they had to come to the hospital, right? It should not be so high that it appears as if you are just attracting the participants to take part in your trial for monetary gains. Trial stoppage rules, like, for example, 3 serious adverse events or other safety procedures, must be defined prior. Documentation archival is very important, whether it is your papers, hard copies, or your electronic data. Everything must be documented, ensuring confidentiality and yet maintaining the proper identification numbers for retrieval later on. So coming to the end, but yes, an important challenge that has come up is COVID-19 pandemic. So we have to think about, we have to ensure that clinical trial integrity is maintained, and yet the subjects are not exposed to the coronavirus. So a lot of literature has come up how you can modify your trials, some follow-ups which can be done on telephone. But again, everything must be documented. So thank you. If there are any questions, you can put them in the comment box and we'll surely try to get back.